Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be calling in from. We are thrilled to have you here. Welcome to week 3 of the 6th annual all-member meeting of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. My name is Sophie Egan. I'm an author and the founder of Full Table Solutions, and also very proudly the co-director of the collaborative. Today is the 3rd installment of our 4-part virtual series, and each day has a different theme. Today's theme is innovation, from building supply chain resilience to imagining a more equitable and racially just food system. This is a timely and critically important topic, and one that we seek all of your input around for shaping future directions that the MCURC can pursue in order to use the collaborative's research, education, and innovation as vehicles for racial equity across the many spaces and ways that it intersects with food systems and with food culture. Before we begin, I did want to mention quickly an exciting virtual opportunity that's coming up, and that's the CIA's annual Worlds of Flavor Festival. This will take place November 10th to 13th, and more details will be sent out in a link in just a moment. And to kick things off, I'll turn it to my fabulous co-director, Eric Montel.
Thanks so much, Sophie, and that sounds like a really terrific program. I've been to so many World of Flavor conferences over the years, and they've always been amazing. And one thing to note is this year as well, the cost of attendance and the admin fee are being waived. So I think it's really a perfect opportunity for all of us to train our staff. You know, one of the things about the program that's really impressive is all of the World of Flavor star chefs coming live from 20 different countries, from Ethiopia to Indonesia. I would say this fits perfectly with our MCURC racial equity agenda today. I think they tie in quite nicely. And I really encourage all of our members to take advantage of what is going to be a very high quality program. I know that. I'm sure also, and one of the things that I know that the Stanford team is absolutely going to be there. So that just sounds terrific. Thank you. So welcome everyone back to the MCURC all-member meeting series, and also a special welcome to the RNDE Stanford team that's joining us today. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it. I'm Eric Montel, Executive Director of RNDE Stanford Dining, and proudly also the co-director of the MCURC. Again, we're going to use the chat for introductions today, so tell us who you are by typing your name, your title, and organization into the chat. Please use the chat also throughout the day to share your reactions, or give a +1 to a comment or a question if there's something that you like. You can certainly use it throughout the day to share comments or ask questions, and as always, we really appreciate hearing from you. So today we're going to have a really exciting agenda for you. We're going to have a keynote address followed by breakout sessions where we're going to be reflecting on the keynote address and a really terrific panel that's happening. And you'll hear more about that later today. We'll have a networking break with our sponsor member Idea Hubs happening as well. And then we're going to hear from some of the great breakout sessions that will be occurring. We're going to hear a couple of report outs. And finally, a few closing remarks and time again for some networking. So pretty exciting agenda for today. And one of the things that I want to say is, you know, today is really part of a journey that we've been on in the MCURC this past year. So far, we've sent 2 emails to all MCURC members about our perspective on racial injustice and racial equity and the progress that we've made so far. We've met with both the MCURC Advisory and Leadership Council members on these issues, and we've gotten feedback from them on steps they believe that we should take. Today, we're going to have a powerful keynote and critically important panel discussion with a breakout session on racial equity. This is going to lead, though, to a racial equity working group made up of both members and sponsors who are going to be working on key strategies for the MCURC. Ultimately, out of this is the desire to create what will come as a racial equity plan. And we truly believe that the MCURC can make a real impact and difference in people's lives. Today's session is a critically important part of this journey. So now, to get everyone ready for today's keynote and panel discussion, we're going to have a poll this morning. And today's poll is going to be focused on racial equity to help us get a better sense of our members and where your thinking is. So today's poll questions are, or is, I would become more active in advancing racial equity if I had a more supportive environment, I had senior leadership buy-in, I felt comfortable talking to others about race, or none of the above, and you're happy with your current level of engagement or any other thoughts that you have. So please write those in the chat. Now you can find the poll on the right top side of your screen. So if you look on the right top side, you'll see the poll. Go to that, please. Click on the poll and go ahead and vote right now. So I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, who we wouldn't be able to have the collaborative without them. Many of them have been with us since the very beginning, and we really appreciate all of their support. Our sincere thanks to our founding sponsors who've been there for the start, and also for our 2020 sponsors who continue to support us during this most challenging time. There's also going to be a virtual tasting from sponsors, and the way to access that virtual tasting is there's a Google form that's found in the chat if you'd like to receive sponsor samples. Thank you to all of the members, and many have done so already, who have completed the form, so there's no need to do that again. But if you'd like these samples, they'll be coming to you at the conclusion of this all-member series, sometime after the October 28th session. Let me also mention to everyone that all of our presentations will be recorded, and the slides and videos from general sessions will be shared afterwards. You'll find them in the member and sponsor portals on our website. So let's take a look now at what our poll is telling us. And it looks like many people feel comfortable about talking to others, or if I felt comfortable talking to others about race was the #1 response. And then none of the above. I'm happy with my current level of engagement, though we hear a good amount from if I had senior leadership buy-in. So I think that's very interesting to see where our members are at right now. So thank you for taking the poll. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the person who has made a tremendous impact on my career and has also done so for many staff and students at Stanford. She's a highly regarded senior leader who was instrumental in founding the MCURC and continues to shape the strategic goals and objectives of the collaborative. She also leads a very large, best-in-class and diverse organization at Stanford, among what I would say are the many hats she wears at Stanford as well. She is a true champion for all people and for all levels of the organization. She works tirelessly on creating racial equity at Stanford and also in the MCURC. I know that you are in for a special presentation and a great moderated panel discussion today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Shirley Everett, Senior Associate Vice Provost at Stanford and the Chair of the MCURC Senior University Administrators Committee, who will be presenting and moderating a panel on racial equity at the intersection of healthy, sustainable, delicious food choices. Welcome, Shirley.
Good morning and good afternoon. Because we have folks that are on the West Coast and in between and the East Coast, I wanted to send you a warm welcome. And welcome to the MCURC session titled Racial Equity at the Intersection of Healthy, Sustainable, Delicious Food Choices. And thank you, Eric, for that warm introduction. And I hope that all of you and your families are healthy and safe during this most difficult time, that all is well at your respective institutions. During this unprecedented year and global pandemic, our highest priority is ensuring the safety and well-being of students, faculty, and staff, and especially our frontline workers from the underserved communities. 2020 has magnified the critical importance of racial equity as the pandemic has disproportionately impacted the Black community and has placed the long-standing reality of racism and social inequality front and center. And as MCURC members, we are working to find best practices and operational innovations that support our vision of cultivating the long-term well-being of all people and the planet, one student, one meal, and might I add, one delicious meal at a time. For this session, I will share introductory remarks and then serve as the moderator for an engaging and inspiring panel discussion. Our four distinguished panelists are known for their outstanding work and are uniquely positioned to provide you with thought-provoking insights, ideas, and calls to action around imagining a more equitable, racially just food system, particularly as it relates to the Black community. As you know, food is essential to life. It provides the energy to run bodily functions and building blocks to grow and repair body tissue. So what we eat matters. It greatly impacts our health, our well-being, our happiness. The topic of this session has special significance for me. I believe that everyone, regardless of race, gender, education, or socioeconomic status, has a human right to healthy, affordable, and sustainable food choices. Nelson Mandela said, "Overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, period. It is the protection of a fundamental human right, the right to dignity and a decent life." And our organization shares this conviction. Here at Stanford, we have consistently advocated for security and pay continuance for all of our employees, including frontline chefs and food service staff. Embracing diversity and inclusion is a fundamental core value of R&DE. And in line with my vision to inspire and empower our staff, we created training and educational opportunities, especially for staff of color, women, and English learners, including computer literacy, culinary apprenticeship, and leadership development programs. To achieve equitable access, it is important to bring people of different backgrounds and perspectives to the table. And we must be willing to leverage the opportunities we are given to create change and to use food as a universal tool to break down barriers. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Food insecurity and the lack of access is an injustice and a call to action for all of us. Hunger hits African American communities disproportionately, and too many face the reality of food insecurity, the uncertainty or inability to acquire enough food to meet the needs of their households due to inefficient resources and racial inequities. At the national level, in the US in 2019, 35.2 million people lived in food insecure households. 8 of the 10 counties with the highest food insecurity rates in the nation are at least 60% African American. And African American households face poverty and hunger at a rate more than twice that of white households. Getting enough food to eat is a consistent struggle for 1 in 4 African American children. The late John Lewis said, "The hungry cannot wait. Talk is fine. Discussion is fine. But we must respond." Poverty and race prevent minority communities from access to healthy food. And according to Johns Hopkins University research, shows food deserts are more prevalent in Black communities where very large supermarkets or farmer markets exist that sell quality fresh produce, whole grain foods, dairy products, and other healthy food choices. And by contrast, unhealthy, low-cost food is abundant in poor neighborhoods, and unhealthy eating habits cause health concerns such as cardiovascular, diabetes, obesity, and hypertension, to name a few, for Blacks in early ages. And at the same time, affordable medical care is a challenge in Black communities. All of these factors are catalysts for poverty and racial disparity. The late Muhammad Ali said, "Wars of nations are fought to change maps, but wars of poverty are fought to map change." Pretty powerful. According to U.S. Department of Agriculture, in 1920, there were nearly 1 million Black farmers, and today there are only 45,000, which is only 1.3% of the total 3.4 million farmers in the United States. What a sad commentary. Many Black farmers lacked equitable access to land and capital, including funding, due to discrimination in lending and other injustices, to be competitive with non-minority farmers. And civil rights legend Fannie Lou Hamer said, "If you give a man food, he will eat it. If you give him land, he will grow his own food." Let that be our mantra. Stanford analysis of census data shows 40% of all Black-owned businesses in the US closed their doors for good in 2020, due largely to COVID-19, but also due to the lack of support. We must continue to collaborate and build a racially just future by placing more deliberate focus on educating, training, and empowering Black students, chefs, researchers, farmers, staff, and leaders. By working together, we can create an inclusive, accessible, and just food system for all communities. Through innovation and teamwork, we can reimagine our future. My mother taught me a long time ago that we must individually and collectively determine our role, our sphere of influence, and the space from which we draw our social capital to take action that advances racial equity everywhere. And she taught me to be the change, because silence is complacency. She taught me to work hard to achieve excellence and leave no one behind. In closing, our way forward is to come together as people to heal the hurt as members of a single humanity. And together, we can engage in civil and constructive dialogue, enact new laws, champion mindsets to overcome racial injustice so that all people have equal access to healthy, sustainable, delicious food. and we must never retreat. I want to share a few slides, a few photos that represent my hope for the future. These are Black farmers wanting to make sure that they have land to grow food and harvest for their communities, and families to dine together with food, fresh food, quality food, delicious food, and have a healthy life. Thank you. We will now begin our panel discussion, and we'll delve into the racial equity intersection of healthy, sustainable, and delicious food choices. And we've gathered a panel of dynamic speakers that include celebrity chef Tanya Holland, Chief Marketing Officer for Produce Marketing Association Lauren Scott, Velvet Frame founder and CEO and Stanford alum Lauren Graham, and Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. And I want to thank our panelists for joining us. It's a wonderful privilege to have you as part of this important discussion. Our hope is that innovative ideas and specific strategies will be born out of this dynamic conversation on how the MCURC can forge ahead in advancing racial equity. And so, without further ado, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the most creative way. And we can start with Chef Tanya Holland.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chef Tanya Holland, the owner of Brown Sugar Kitchen in Oakland, California. I've been fortunate enough to been working with Stanford, with Dr. Everett and her team in the residential and dining services for more than 4 years. It's the work I love doing. I love reaching out to community and working to create a sustainable food system. And I'm currently working on a book and a museum project at the Oakland Museum of California that will have dishes that will be more plant forward.
And today we have two Laurens. Lauren Scott.
Hello, Dr. Everett, and hello, everyone, and fellow panelists. My name is Lauren Scott with the Produce Marketing Association. It's a thrill to be here to talk to you. My background is in marketing, and Dr. Everett, I know you have a background in business as well. So look forward to the conversation to talk to you about consumers, including Black consumers, the similarities and the differences. And I love the conversation of having anytime you have a chef on a panel, it's always going to make it more exciting. So happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Lauren Graham.
Thank you, Dr. Everett. It's so wonderful to be here. And as a Stanford alum and someone who's had the privilege since I was 17 of seeing and being a part of the broader Stanford family and the great work that you're doing, it really warms my heart to be here. As was mentioned, my background is in sustainability and environment, but also the intersection with social impact. So food and food security and access to healthy, sustainable, delicious food is a big part of the work that I'm doing. And because food is the most intimate connection that most people have to nature, it's often that good springboard for a broader conversation. So most of my work has been in the context of consulting with nonprofits and startups, but there's always so much work to do, and just sharing the message is a really important thing for me. So I'm glad to be here in good company.
Thank you all. And we will hear from Eric Adams after 10:30 he will be able to join us at that time. So let's get started. I'm going to ask the first question. Oh, Eric is here. Before I ask the first question, Eric, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Adams. I am the Brooklyn Borough President. For those of you outside the city area, is equivalent to your county executive. And I am probably here for the oddest reason. Retired captain in the police department, and now an elected official. But I have a story of using a healthy lifestyle to reverse my diabetes, and I just completed a book on the topic.
Fantastic. Well, we're looking forward to hearing more about that. So let's start with Tanya Holland. Tanya, why aren't there more well-known celebrity Black chefs? And what do you see as the most significant barriers?
Well, Shirley, I've been asking that for a couple decades. It's not even the celebrity piece, but just owners, chef owner operators, restaurateurs, management in hotel restaurants, leaders in the prominent food organizations. There's still been a barrier to entry, which is really ironic since historically African Americans really were the leads in the kitchen that created so much of the cuisine that has that is thought of as American cuisine. And there's been a barrier to entry, though. Even if you're educated, even if you go to the right culinary schools, you work for some people. What I noticed in my career is we weren't advanced, we weren't given the same opportunity, and we were marginalized. Just it's happened in other industries as well. But I think it's been kind of silent in the food industry because we do represent a large population of workers, but nobody's really paid attention to the leadership. And as owners, there's been a barrier in access to capital and real estate, which is really the most important piece for being able to grow your business, to get the right kind of lease in a location that is viable, to be able to get the financing, if you're going to be an independent operator, to find investors. And then the media has also played, a hand in it. They've been really, for at least a few decades, putting the male, predominantly white male chefs at the forefront of media and elevating them, and not, anyone of color or African Americans or even women. I've seen a lot of change in the past 5 to 10 years, but there's still a lot more, work to be done.
There is work to be done, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lauren Scott, can you share your perspective on the link between food and racial equality? And can you expound on the challenges to accessing high quality food?
Yes, and the Produce Marketing Association did some what we called foundational research a couple of years ago. Because as I said, I have a consumer products background. And when I came to PMA, the first question is, as a marketer, what drives people to eat food? And what was important is that we didn't just look within produce and fruits and vegetables, but we looked at all food. What we found was, quite frankly, astounding to me. And anybody who's done research, you do the data cuts because you have a hypothesis and it's there, and it wasn't. And the fact is that the drivers of why we eat food, regardless of your background, regardless of your economic status, are all the same. So if we primarily all have the same needs and desires, then the reason why people eat more of some foods or others comes down to two things. Because we know, as you said, Dr. Everett, eating fruits and vegetables is the single simplest thing that people can do to live a full and vibrant life. And the two reasons why they don't are, one is lack of access. And I know we'll talk more about that. And there is absolutely no reason in this time or any time that people should not have enough food to eat. it's unconscionable, especially at this point. And it's upsetting that we still have to have this conversation, but that's where we are, and I'm glad we're having it. But the second reason is one that we have an opportunity to drive, and this leads into what Lauren is talking about, because it leads to bigger opportunities, and it's called lack of consideration. So even if people have access, even if they're able to have a store or have a farmer's market, or they have the SNAP funds, or they have plenty of money to buy it, if people don't have the drive and the will to buy it and to eat it, then there's no way that they're going to increase consumption. So that's why this conversation is particularly important for those in the audience who are feeding young people, feeding staff, because it's opening their eyes and their taste buds to new experiences, which eventually gets more fruit and vegetable. And that ultimately leads to equity, making sure people have access, but also it's presented with dignity and not with charity, as anybody would want a product.
Thank you so very much. Let's go right into just expounding on that with a question to Lauren Graham. How does food get on your plate? And we know plant-based is healthier for you and better for the planet, but help us understand the complexity of how food gets on your plate.
That's a great question. And complexity is something that should be bolded and underlined, because the food system, particularly the way that we engage with it in the United States, is extremely complex. The supply chain includes many different actors, from the farmer to the processor, the distributor, the retailer, and then ultimately where we get our food, consumers, from the grocery store. So what makes it onto our plate is also as important as what does not make it onto our plate. And by that, I really mean two things. One is food waste, and the other is the cultural aspect of food. Whether you're eating the meat or the offals, like what your experience is culturally and historically of what you or your community had access to, and what therefore is built into the palate is very important. On the food waste side, we know that roughly 30 to 40% of all food that is produced ends up getting thrown away. It's never eaten. And that creates a huge challenge for landfills, because that is unfortunately where most organic produce that could be composted, or better yet, could make it onto a plate, where it ultimately ends up going. And just underscoring what is being said, during the pandemic, there are so many people who now find themselves food insecure. And there's absolutely no reason, because we are able to produce enough food really to feed the world, if you want to think about it in that way. But it's so important to focus on how to remove or divert food that ends up being wasted. The other thing to think about when it comes to how food gets on your plate is back to the production side. And you can break it into two major categories. One is the water input, and the other is the carbon input. The water is fairly straightforward. If you eat a piece of broccoli, that had to grow, and then you really have three different types of water that go into the system. There's blue water, green water, and gray water. The blue water is really what we think about with irrigation. It's what you put directly into the soil. And then the green water is really the rainwater, the other side that we don't see. And then the gray water is really the manufacturing. So when products get washed before they get packaged. And then on the carbon side, it's everything from the diesel fuel that is powering the tractor to the petroleum that goes into producing plastic packaging. It's the entire perspective. So it's good to think about what gets onto our plate and what the water input and carbon input is. And that's why a plant-forward diet, though not perfect, is definitely better for the human body and better for the planet in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of food.
Thank you, Lauren. I hope our audience is listening. Great answer. Eric, when it comes to health, why does a person's diet disproportionately affect their health outcomes, especially among Black people?
And I really appreciate both Lauren's presentation, because I believe we need to, one, have a redefinition of what food is, and not the food-like substance that we are consuming. We are so far removed from what real food is right now due to processing. And as I stated, I spent my 22 years as a law enforcement officer fighting against police abuse and reform within the police department. And little did I know what I believe my real purpose was in the dark moment of being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And at the time of that diagnosis, I lost my sight in my left eye, and I was losing in my right. The doctor told me the tingling I was feeling on my hands and feet was neuropathic nerve damage, that eventually I was going to lose some fingers and toes. I had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, I had an ulcer. That's what drove me to the doctor in the first place with the vision loss. And after going to 5 of the best doctors, as being the county executive here in Brooklyn, I had access to amazing physicians. And they all told me the same thing, that I had to go on insulin right away, 3 of the medications, as well as additional medications for the ulcer, high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, and all of the other things that many of our family members are carrying around in their pocketbooks or pockets. And it wasn't until I went to and did something extremely scientific. I went to the computer and Googled reversing diabetes instead of living with diabetes. And I found some, new research, and did my own outreach, and met a doctor in Ohio from the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Esseltine, who treated Bill Clinton. Took a flight down to see him from New York. He told me about this new concept of plant-based lifestyle and the connectivity between what we eat and some of the chronic diseases that we're facing. And when I returned to the city, I went on a plant-based diet, Whole Foods plant-based diet. 3 weeks later, my vision came back. 3 months later, my nerve damage went away. My diabetes went in remission. My ulcer went away. The high blood pressure, high cholesterol, all normalized. My PSA indicators of prostate troubles went away. My 80-year-old mother, a year later, followed me. She was 15 years diabetic, 7 years on insulin. Mom did the same thing, went whole food plant-based. 2 months after doing so, Mom was cycled off her insulin. And it was never our DNA, as the doctors were telling me, it was our dinner. We shared the same dinner, and therefore we were sharing the same chronic diseases. And, it gave me a lot of joy because, Mother has 6 children. She loves them all, but she adores me.
Well, we adore you too with that testimony. I am so pleased. Everybody should hear that testimony. And I think Tanya Holland is going to talk to us about how she's helping everybody with the new testimony through her new cookbook. So, Chef Tanya, you have a new cookbook that you're working on, which also has an interesting link. Can you elaborate on that? A link to this topic?
Yeah, well, I really want to continue to tell the story of the contribution of African Americans to the foodways, and especially from the South. My heritage with my mom from Louisiana, my dad from Virginia, and their family, extended family, moved west during the migration. And several people landed in California. I've landed in California and have really embraced these values of, working with organic, sustainable, and local ingredients. And I want to continue to write more recipes about that for the cookbook, and get them out there. I'm fortunate enough to have a platform now where I can reach a bigger audience through television or print media. And I feel like it's a responsibility as a restaurateur. I don't want to just cook exclusive meals for people who can dine out. I want to be able to share my knowledge for a broader audience, because, as Lauren said, there's just no reason why this country, everyone should not be fed, be going hungry. And The cookbook is, as I said, going to be plant-based forward. So just making the meat more of a garnish on the plate and not the, the main ingredient. And I've heard stories like Eric Adams, and it's just wonderful to hear it firsthand. I know that it's a real thing, that your diet really can, affect and have reversal effects on your health and, just sustain people. And the book is a 2-year project. So you'll be hearing about the project a lot for the next 2 years. And hopefully we can all get back together and, talk about how it comes out.
Looking forward to that. Great luck on all of the projects that you are undertaking. And we can't wait to see your new cookbook and enjoy some of the recipes.
Thank you.
Lauren Scott, what is your best hope and strategy to get fresh and healthy produce into Black communities and break these racial barriers in terms of equitable access to nourishing food?
It's a great question, and I love the topic of today because it talks about innovation, hope, and dreaming. And any marketer, that's where you have to start. So the first thing is to recognize, as I said at the top, assume that people are coming from a place of equity. If you start to add assumptions to what people want to eat or what they're interested in or even what they've been exposed to, you start to create barriers that aren't there. So if we want to give our children exposure to all different types of products, there's an organization that PMA works with, Brighter Bites, and they give food to the families, but it's not about charity. When I first saw the brand, it's something that everybody wants to sign up for. So bringing the best foot forth of a brand, giving people access to different products, give them the origin, tell them the story. The best part about food, and what I love about the upcoming book that Tanya is talking about, is the story, is the origin. And anytime you want to connect with someone, eat their food. That is the biggest sign of respect. And it also helps to break barriers. So what I would love to see is that we get to eat each other's food more often, because that's how we start to learn about culture. And then when we have food in our bellies and we're satiated, then we can start to learn more about each other and listen and have empathy and understanding. So when you ask what my hope is, it's beyond just getting more fruits and vegetables in people's hands. It's really that we can live the 2 slides that you showed at the end, and we can have a more just and verdant world.
Thank you. Well stated. Lauren Graham, as you're listening to all of this, are there partners you consider as allies and with whom you work to address racial disparities in sustainability? And in what ways do you work with them, and what do they do? Give us an overview.
Sure. Well, fortunately, there are more and more organizations that are stepping into this space. And a lot of that is driven based on the intersection between climate justice and the broader push for more inclusion in the sustainability and environmental movement and the racial justice movement. So the equity piece is a key kind of glue between the two. And even though some of these organizations are not necessarily focused on food, they are focused on the impact of what healthy, sustainable food can do for the communities that they serve, and what the absence of that connection or access or affordability can do. The Climate Justice Alliance is one that's really top of mind for me. Another is Uprose, based in New York, led by Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. And these organizations are the kinds of organizations that really center women, LGBTQ, and people of color overall. And that's a really key part, because they're trying to model the leadership through the way that their organizations are structured. Then there are others that are connected to universities, like how we have you here, Dr. Everett, representing Stanford. The Georgetown Climate Center has done great work around transportation and climate. and the idea of physical movement within cities, particularly those that have a large Black and brown population, and how lack of access to transportation affects the way that people engage with the food system. The Hip Hop Caucus, which is not specifically around environment or food, but is about how you engage the youth. So a little bit more of a demographic shift, how you engage youth in broader social justice issues, which of course intersect with climate justice and racial justice. And then there are some also just community gardens and farms. And as a New Yorker, I'm a little biased there, but Harlem Grown is a fantastic one that I've volunteered with, that has taken over corners of city blocks and have gotten little kids and their families with the hands in the dirt and reminding people where food comes from. It doesn't just come from the grocery shelf, it comes from the seeds in the soil, and creating a very intimate connection is critical. And the last organization, last two, We Act for Environmental Justice. They do great work in this space. And then the Climate Museum. They are building, or in the process of moving towards building a physical space, but their focus is really on using museums, and historically what we choose to enshrine in our museums is a lot of, says a lot about our culture and what our priorities are. And the process of looking at climate and creating the first museum in the United States and second in the world specifically dedicated to climate, that work again is very youth-centered, very student of color centered, and is about using the arts and the more creative and media-driven opportunities. I think going back to what Tanya said about the importance of the media playing a positive and healthy and constructive role, they're one of the organizations that is seeking to do that as well. So fortunately, there's a lot of growth in this space, and the intersectionality among these issues is becoming more and more present.
Thank you. You have shared some comprehensive resources for our audience. And I know our younger audience loved hearing you say the hip hop group. So they certainly
can, yes, they're a fun one.
Get engaged at all ages is critically important. Thank you so much. Eric, from a public policy perspective, what policies have you been able to implement towards a plant-centered system? And what are some of the impacts achieved by those policies?
Well, we are extremely excited about just the energy that is present here in the borough of Brooklyn and has really cascaded throughout the entire city. Number one, we must be intentional about our actions and extremely specific on what the goals are. And I can't tell a person what to put on their grill in their backyard or what's in their oven. But government should not feed the crisis. And that is what we're doing. When you see the conflict in our agencies, where an agency like the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene here in the city, the agency is spending millions of dollars to fight childhood obesity, childhood diabetes, childhood asthma. Yet every day in the Department of Education in New York, we feed our babies 960,000 meals that cause childhood obesity, childhood diabetes, childhood asthma. You go to the hospital to deal with high blood pressure, hypertension, and when you leave, you are given a menu and food that actually feed the crises of your healthcare. Even our correctional facilities, the food we feed inmates, they leave correctional facilities more unhealthy than when they came in. Child protected custody, all of those areas. And so I was extremely happy that we were able to get the city of New York to stop purchasing processed meat, a type 1 carcinogen, and we're feeding it to people. We're looking to have a 50% beef reduction in the city of New York. We have an amazing program now at Bellevue Hospital, the first of its kind in New York City, if not one of the first in America, where we have lifestyle medicine. 750 people are signed up on the waiting list. Over 200 people are going through the program, and we're doing something that was often foreign in medicine with reversing diseases. And I believe when you start to look at even the proceeds from my book, Healthy at Last, the money is going to health ministries. We want to start health ministries in every church. There's no reason for praying for Sister Jones and Brother Harris, who's in the hospital, when in our fellowship halls, we're feeding them the same food that put them in the hospital in the first place. And many of our ministers and bishops are dealing with real healthcare crises. And our goal is to cut diabetes by 50%. It's so important. Diabetes, the leading cause of blindness, leading cause of non-trauma limb amputation. It's one of the leading causes of heart disease, leading causes of kidney failure. 30 million Americans are diabetic, 84 million Americans are pre-diabetic. We want to go to the heart of what is the protective for all these chronic diseases and really change the dialogue to say, government, my tax dollars should not go to feeding the healthcare crisis, specifically in general, but specifically in Black and brown community, where you have the lack of healthy foods everywhere, from the schools to the corner bodegas to the fast food restaurants to what is being even served during the coronavirus crisis. We was giving people food that fed the destruction of their systems. And instead of building their immune system, we were adding to the destruction of them. And when you see 90% of the people who are hospitalized had coexisting comorbidities and pre-existing conditions, and over 90% of the people who died from COVID-19 had comorbidities and pre-existing conditions. We have to stop being just reactive. We have to become proactive, and that is the mission we're trying to accomplish here in Brooklyn and in the entire city of New York.
Hats off to you, brother. Preach the sermon. Because when some of us who go to churches that provide fried chicken, it sure tastes good. But boy, then we pray for you once you have to go to the hospital to deal with that. So let's continue to be preventative, and especially using food in that manner. Now, we're not saying not to eat fried chicken, but in moderation. Thank you, Eric. When we think about food, and Eric talked about it from a preventative measure, Tanya, what are the common misconceptions about food from the African diaspora, especially African American or Afro-Caribbean cuisines?
Well, interesting. Everybody said something that I wanted to comment on, and I know Eric will appreciate this. Probably a good 20 years ago, I did a program with Share Our Strength, and we went out to a community center in Brownsville and worked with some families who were, in transition. Maybe a parent had been struggling with addiction, or, they were homeless. And I was there with a friend, and we were supposed to teach them healthy meals and how to eat healthy. And then Lauren Scott will love this, because I was assigned to make a fruit salad. And I went shopping for it, and I brought back some star fruit, carambola. And the director was just like, no, they'll never be able to get that. Don't know. And I was like, wait, I want to expose them to this. And they loved it. They lost their mind. They had never seen such. And this is the thing that I do as a restaurateur. We create memories for people by giving them new flavors and experiences. And I think that, so many times what I see in African-American food is we continue to get dumbed down. Like all we eat is fried chicken. Now I make fried chicken, and a lot of my, my income comes from fried chicken, but it's with organic, dairy and sustainable chicken. And I have vegan side dishes, and I encourage variety and balance. But I think the more exposure we can give people that, exotic fruits, exotic vegetables taste good. It's not just the same stuff. Don't eat that over and over again. And then I was, Lauren Graham has her Harlem Pride, and I have my Oakland Pride with City Slicker Farms that does something very similar to what it sounds like the Harlem Grown does, is we teach folks how to make backyard gardens. And, you just see people light up when they're empowered, when they learn like where their food comes from and how good it can taste. if they have a hand in, making it or buying it or farming it. And, I just think with our cuisine in general, it's just been disrespected, and I now am on the board of trustees of the James Beard Foundation, and my work with them, we're making a concerted effort to make sure that we get more recognition, people of color, especially African American people who have been at it for a long time, and that what are the standards of excellence? Our cuisine is excellent. We haven't had the same access to have, velvet chairs and white tablecloths for decades and decades, but it doesn't really matter because the food's excellent, it tastes good, and the origins are quite healthy because they're from the farm and they're from the table. It's original farm to table cuisine. So I'm just, my goal is to get people to, as I've been fortunate enough to, learn over the years working with food historians. I'm working with a food historian on my cookbook who has followed the stories of the enslaved cooks of Virginia. And from James Hemings to Hercules, to the presidential chefs to other chefs. And we just, we have made such an impact, and we will, the intention that I have is that we're going to start again, and we're going to make even more of an impact and get our people back on track to eat well.
That was really wonderful, as you are educating the palate and creating memories through flavors and exposing people to new flavors in regards to food. Awesome. Lauren Scott, when you think about the produce industry, how can it create memories, and how can it better educate the palate, especially for those in the Black community?
I want to pick up that answer on what Tanya said. My dad grew up down south, and I also want to pick up on what Eric said. When people are going to the bodegas and the corner stores, they're looking for cheap, convenient food. Because my dad would say he grew up so poor, but they didn't know it. And the reason why they didn't know it is because they had plenty of food. Now, the food that they had was cheap and convenient because they grew it in the backyard. And he said everybody had a plot, that they had a small farm where they would grow their fruits and vegetables. So it was organic, it was healthy, it was readily available, it was plentiful, and it was convenient. And if you think about society today, we still have those same needs. It has to be plentiful. It has to be readily available. It has to be convenient. It has to be tasty. It has to be something that that your kids are going to eat. So if you think about those needs and desires have not changed, it's just our lifestyles have changed. Tanya, when your family left, it's the Great Migration, when people start going north and they come to the cities. And, I have a place up in the Bronx, and we got almost all the boroughs here on the phone. And the lifestyle is just very different. So if you think about what it is that you have to do in the food industry, is how do you still deliver on the needs of the consumers, but in a different way? So of course, I love that star fruit example, because that's a perfect example of why there's no reason, if you think about the taste profile of a star fruit, that would not be something that would be palatable to the folks that you were making the fruit salad for. And if anybody had an opportunity to listen to Magic Johnson, he talks about the journey he had of putting his Starbucks, and people say, no, that's not going to work. You just have to change up the product a little bit, but people will come and people want to explore. They want to have those journeys and they want to have those tastes. So I would say, regardless of who you are either marketing for or cooking for, think about the experience that you want to deliver. It's really the same no matter who you're talking about. And don't undermine or don't assume, well, that's not going to work or people aren't going to eat that. Put your best foot forward, regardless of who it is. And that's how you're going to change a broader system. And Lauren Graham can talk about this more than I can, because really what we're talking about is holistic systems of life and how it affects your home life, how it affects your opportunities, your work life, your personal life. And that's really at the heart of what we're talking about. And as in a university, all the universities are systems. And really what dining services is feeding and fueling a system so that the students and the faculty don't have to worry about being nourished. They can use their energy to fuel their minds for something bigger. And that's really what we're talking about, that we're trying to do in broader society.
Thank you, Lauren. I love that analogy of changing systems, because when we change them, everybody, hopefully, will be impacted in a positive way. Lauren Graham, in regards to the restaurant and food industry, what are some of the supply chain challenges that all of these major systems are impacted by? And throw in there a little bit about how might climate change impact that as well?
That's another great question. I wanted to pick up something that Tanya said, and Lauren as well, mentioning Hercules, who was really a famous chef who was an enslaved man under George Washington's family. And there are so many wonderful stories of the history of Black chefs in the White House. And actually a friend of mine who's a fellow Stanford graduate and also a James Beard Book Award winner, Adrian Miller, has written extensively about that. So there is really the seeds or the beginning of chronicling some of that history and how what we think of as American really is rooted in the Black community, particularly the Southern experience. And going off of something that Lauren said as well, like the importance of talking about exposure and access, and you don't want to dumb down the experience. That is such a key piece as well. So getting into a bit more of the climate change and supply chain pieces. So like I mentioned before, food is really the most primal, direct, and intimate connection that most people have with nature. But what we don't often think about is how that plays into the larger evolutionary timeline of us as a human species. Because for most of our history, we were hunters and gatherers. Everything that we ate was fresh and wild and seasonal and local. And we moved based on the seasons and based on access to food. And what has changed over time, of course, is the development of civilization and the growth of the industrial farming process. And what that has done is made food cheaper, more accessible, and also taken away the seasonality. So it could be the dead of winter in New York City, but you're still getting fresh berries as if it's summertime. You're still getting bananas or avocados because we have created these very long supply chains. And because there is a common demand, there's an expectation that everything should be available at all times. So the push for how to get high quality, low cost is really the dynamic that is at play. And that rise of civilization and the mass production of agriculture is what has created these supply chains, many of which are abusive to land, water, people who provide the labor, and of course to the environment at large. And the challenge that we're seeing within the supply chain is how to create resilience, especially during shocks to the system. We are going through one of those shocks to the system, and also trying to figure out how to address rapid population growth. We are approaching 8 billion people on the planet, and the planet was never designed to be able to hold that many people. And at the same time, the access to wild food is now becoming a luxury. So are you buying or able to afford wild caught salmon, or are you buying farm salmon? So the different influxes of social class and income really come to play as well. So how do we really meet the needs of a growing population and also trying to reimagine food systems and supply chains that give people the biodiversity that they're craving, but rebuild a system that is not directly negatively impacting the biodiversity in that system? And going a little bit into the cost piece of it, what we spend as a percentage of our disposable income on food has dropped rapidly. I mean, today, the average American spends somewhere around 9.5% to 10% of their income on food. If we were to go back to the early 1900s, that was slightly above 40%. So when we think about who has the most disposable income and how to maximize the value regardless of their income level is really important. So the supply chain is a function of the globalization of food systems, systems of imports and exports, as well as the challenge of trying to get more out of degraded food systems and degraded land systems, even in the midst of a technological revolution that allows only 1.3% of the American population to be farmers, when that was much higher in the early 1900s, around 40%. And that the urban influx moving from rural systems where we were connected and more responsible for our food and moving to more urban systems increased the need of the supply chain, particularly to support major cities. So that's really the challenge moving forward. And anyone who works in the food system and really looks at supply chains will tell you how fragile those supply chains are, and the way that climate change and the impact of really not having a farm bill system or the legislation that supports farming really being in touch with comprehensive climate legislation, how that leaves the food system extremely vulnerable.
Lauren, have you ever thought of going into politics?
Never.
We need you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your informative answers, and especially talking about creating resiliency in supplies and reimagining our supply biodiversity. Very informative. We need more of that in our government leadership. We're going to hear from Eric, who I think has done some things in his area that should be a model for other cities across the country. But Eric, talk to us about, how does systematic racism prevent access for Black people to healthy and sustainable food?
And I believe, some of the important conversations that took place with both Laurens is really sharing on the ground, how do you get access to healthy food on a granular level? And we have to reimagine food and food systems. And when you look at the lack of access, not only in our governmental agencies, but in the local stores, we don't incentivize healthy food in the various communities of color. And it's so important to not have a disconnected healthcare system, because if we continue to operate in silos, we see that the healthcare system that I like to call sick care, we don't see the connection between what we're teaching our doctors in medical school. Only 25% of the medical schools in our country will teach one course or 8 hours on nutrition. We're taught more on prescription. If we don't connect it to how do we teach children, our new home economic courses should be about teaching nutritionally based meal, particularly in a place like Brooklyn, where almost 50% of the residents speak a language other than English at home. These children can go home and really start empowering families to understand the access to healthy food, what to look for. And then we must show people how to do it in an inexpensive way. One of the things we're doing is, how do you go into your local bodega and make smart food choices? As we fight to ensure access to healthy food, we also have to have an immediate short-term plan that address how do we find ways of ensuring people are getting healthy meals and healthy food at the current state. And so I believe, and one thing I'm aggressively looking towards in conversation with Cornell universities and other entities, I think we could turn our cities into agrarian economies. We may not have new land, but we do have a lot of roof space. I would like to see in every NYCHA development to use those rooftops for hydroponic farming, vertical farming, certain products we can grow here locally, and we could deal with the food apartheid and food deserts that are very real. But if we teach our young people the economic benefits as well as the health benefits that's attached to growing locally, and we can do so in all of our schools, there's no reason our children can't grow their food and serve it in their cafeterias and learn about the importance of the nutritional value that's attached to it. We have a real battle. And when you look at some of the things that Uproads are doing and other organizations are doing, I want to complement it with stopping the disjointedness of our healthcare system, healthy food, and healthy outcomes for our children. Right now, we see it as separate silos. And I say, no, it is all connected. And we need to connect those dots and ensure our families can have healthy food so we can have healthy children and families.
Well stated. And using rooftops is a wonderful idea. That's called innovation. Fantastic. We have about 4 minutes left, and I believe we have quite a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask the folks that have asked questions in the chat to ask those, and hopefully some of you are going to go into the individual rooms where others will be asking questions. So I will then ask you all one last question before I close out the session. This has been so informative, and I don't want to use the word meaty, so I won't say that. But it has been really informative. I'm going to ask you all one question, the same question. There are students connected today to this session. Can you speak to the career paths and exciting opportunities that are available so that they can get out there and make this a more just food system? Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it was Eric who said, but it gave me an idea about, we have to make the good food more convenient. I mean, I definitely saw that opening my restaurant in West Oakland neighborhood, definitely food desert, all the corner stores still selling all the sugary sodas and the high fat snacks. So I think if, anyone wants to work on that product innovation side, there also needs to be more connection and just to connect all the systems, as everybody's been saying. We can't work in our silos. Yeah. People have, the restaurant industry is suffering right now, but it's a chain. And, we have to really go back and look at our agricultural system and our food supply system because, like Lauren said, there's enough food, but as I know, as Eric knows, it's not being distributed equally. So there's a lot of problems to be solved and a lot of great organizations that exist to join. And I think there's plenty of good work that we can do, and we need to start now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Lauren Scott?
My answer is you can do anything. Don't get in your own way.
Absolutely. Lauren Graham?
I would encourage all of the students to really think about their academic path. As someone who did not start off in the environmental field, but found it through my interest in sociology and in studying poverty and Black and Brown communities, don't count yourself out. We need particularly more people of color in the environmental and sustainability movements. We really, really do. So thinking about how you can make your impact there. And I'm always open to being a sounding board to any student who is interested in talking. I do a lot of mentorship work, and I actively build my network of professionals who look like us. So I'm more than happy to be that point of contact. And I'd also like to make a quick shout out for the work of Dr. Dorcetta Taylor, whose fantastic work first for many years at the University of Michigan School of Environment and Sustainability, and now at Yale School of the Environment, on why people of color fall out of the diversity pipeline when it comes to getting into careers that can lead to change in this space, and what can be done if you're running a nonprofit or if you are someone who is seeking career advancement. So that's really important work that can guide us to thinking about how we might overcome some of these challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you. And last, but certainly not least, Eric Adams.
Two names I want to introduce to them, Brother W.E. Du Bois and Lou Rawls. Brother Du Bois talked about the imperativeness of the talented 10% going back into their community and leading from the front. Lou Rawls did United Negro College Fund for years, and he said a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Black grandmothers and grandfathers saved jars of pennies on their mantelpiece, hoping to put a Black child through college so they could have a professional capacity and come back into their communities to be doctors, to be environmentalists, to be teachers and educators. The goal of sending you to college was not for you to buy a BMW, was not for you to enjoy a beach somewhere. It was because of those sacrifices that you are who you are, and I am who I am. Now it's time to come home and put on your armor and fight this battle for those who have been left behind so we can all get through this together. This is their opportunity. The winds of change have never been blown by adults. It has always been blown by young people. So I tell those young people who are listening, take a deep breath and blow this globe in the direction you want it to go into. If Black lives really matter, let's not only stop police abuse, let's stop the medical abuse, the food abuse, and all the other abuses that we're facing. This is your time.
Stop the abuses. Absolutely. This is their time. I want to end this wonderful session by just saying thank you to all four of you. I host and moderate quite a few sessions. This is my very first time at Stanford University and with MCURC hosting a session with 4 outstanding Black leaders. It has warmed my soul today. And I hope everybody listening found this session to be insightful and informative. And the panel is just like no other I've worked with. I believe probably most everybody, or all, I hope, who are in the audience took something away that will help them lead a better life in terms of how we deal with food and how we work together to make sure that we have a just food system that allows access to everyone, and including our Black community. I want to thank all the panelists for their personal stories and for the work they're doing from Stanford all the way to New York. Wonderful connections here today. So thank you for all that you are doing. And I will turn the session back to Sophie Egan. Thank you all. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you all so much. I think above all, I'm feeling rather speechless myself, at a loss for words. And Dr. Everett, I think you said it best, which is that this session has so warmed my soul. And I hope that's the case for everyone who had the chance to join us today. I'm also feeling just tremendous gratitude at this moment for all of our speakers for taking the time to join us today. I think you saw today that it's really hard to overstate what an honor and a privilege it is to have learned from each of their insights, heard their stories, and been so inspired by each of the work they're doing. It's also really invaluable to have had the chance to hear perspectives from 4 key lenses: culinary, health, sustainability, and business, given the Menus of Change tagline and what the Collaborative's foundational principles are all about. Each of our speakers brought tremendous expertise and experience in those areas. So now we really want to invite you to share your reflections and your reactions. So we're going to head to the breakout sessions. which will be followed by sponsor member idea hubs on the future of university food service, really relating to that resilience and innovation theme that we also mentioned, and especially Lauren Scott mentioned. So first, some instructions for your breakout sessions. In order to foster an environment that invites as many perspectives into the discussion as possible, we suggest the following ground rules. Be respectful. Only one person speaks at a time. Speak for yourself, not for others. If at any point you feel offended or uncomfortable, please say so and say why. Everyone is asked to help the facilitator keep the discussion moving and staying on track. Also, personal stories remain confidential within your breakout room, unless otherwise stated. And then lastly, just if you have any audio or technical issues, please visit the help desk in the breakouts tab. So in terms of steps for the breakout, step 1, we ask to please self-identify a facilitator. Step 2, please self-identify a note taker. This will involve some volunteering. Please use your time together to reflect and brainstorm using the following discussion prompts. They are listed, they'll be listed in your breakout rooms, but just to verbally share them with you, it's what did you learn today that you had not heard before or that surprised you? How did that make you feel? What happens when you talk about racism and inequities with people from a different racial or ethnic background? Share a story or lessons learned from your experience on campus or in your organization. And then how have you worked toward change in the past? What worked, what didn't work? And then lastly, this is really critical for us, is how can the MCURC help bring about long-term change toward racial equity at the intersection of healthy, sustainable, delicious food choices? So we'll ask you to narrow the list. There'll be some instructions for the note taker. I won't go into all those details now. More information will be shared in your rooms. After your breakouts, we'll head over to the Idea Hub sessions, also taking place in the Breakouts tab. We'll then reconvene all together back here on the main stage at 12:10 Pacific to hear report outs from 3 important voices in the MCURC. So you won't want to miss that closing session to help provide some takeaways and next steps from all of the rich discussions today. So now, go ahead and click Breakouts on the left, enter your breakout room, click Share Audio Video, and enjoy the breakout sessions and the Idea Hubs, and we'll see you back on stage at 12:10 Pacific time.